we have Bruno Almeida from Fortum, and I guess we've all faced the fact that when you get to the finish line of a race, it doesn't end there, but there is always a next lap, or the race continues, or nobody's ever ready in the IT business. So I think Bruno has his speech about this, adopted DevOps and are cloud native. Now what? So the floor is all yours.
Sounds great, and thank you for making already the initial introduction to the topic, and actually very good that it was we had these two previous sessions, because there's a lot of synergies with what has been talked so far. Before I start, a quick introduction about myself and where I'm coming from. So my name is Bruno. I'm driving the technology and architecture at Fortum. Essentially, I'm driving our strategy and governance topics on how we develop digital solutions, and also serving as an advisor, as an architect to several of our projects. Fortum, for the ones who don't know, it's a leading European energy company. We are the third largest energy company in Europe on clean tech, so producing electricity that we so needed for our lives. And throughout my career, I've been working across different industries, such as, in addition to energy, of course, manufacturing, telcos, cybersecurity, etc. And there is a lot of aspects of cloud and DevOps that I noticed that are overlooked. And I want to talk a bit about that. Often when we are talking about why should we use cloud, or how do we want, why should we adopt the DevOps model? Quite often, we as engineers, we know the reasons, but often we fail to express those. We fail to express those in a sense that business stakeholders can understand. And I usually drive to these 5 key points. We know that by heart, cloud has cool technologies, DevOps makes things more efficient, but often we overlook this business aspects that, for instance, by leveraging this type of technologies and processes and culture, essentially, we are trading CapEx for OpEx. We are trading having to deal with massive amounts of purchasing of hardware to data centers and trying to focus into that instead of focusing in actually building value to our business. So both cloud and DevOps model kind of allow us that and allows us to benefit from those economies of scales that providers are having by purchasing such a large capacity of hardware. So we actually can focus on the things that we know best, which is that we can focus on developing digital solutions that can add value to our business. But often the question to us or on the technical team is, what kind of cloud should we use? What kind of flavor would you want to use? And that was actually one of the questions that people were having in the previous sessions about both Azure and AWS and Google Cloud and whatnot. And hybrid and multi-cloud tends to be trending nowadays. And I think you need to see it as kind of a pros and cons. When you are looking for a specific architecture, for a specific solution, I will say that hybrid or multi-cloud architecture is perhaps the least, or the one that you shouldn't select by default. Is not your go-to weapon, because there is a lot of drawbacks if you try to implement a workload across different environments. First, of course, you are usually not going to use a lot of the high-level managed services. You are going to use the lowest common denominator, which is essentially using virtual machines, or often you are reducing to using Kubernetes. You also have a fragmented or poor developer toolchain. We know that, and yes, Kubernetes does kind of addresses that, as Giovanni was actually explaining and showing, but it kind of forces you to box into that corner. In essence, like trying to select a hybrid or multi-cloud architecture should be deal as kind of as a second type of choice. In my view, there are of course cases where it makes sense, But those cases are quite edgy if you think about it. So for instance, if you are either bursting to the cloud, meaning that you have a workload that is on premise and you want to then leverage cloud for capacity, for temporary capacity, those kind of things make sense. Or if you have a specific part of your workload that needs to be run in a specific geographic location for your compliance or for performance, for latency, that of course kind of makes sense. But by default, the way that we try to look at it is that, you know, simple is better, and we usually try to design for a single cloud. But there are, of course, multiple levers, and it's not just a technical decision, right? And that's kind of the challenge that people need to realize, is that we often, from a software engineering perspective, we look from the technical constraints, but it's not just technical constraints. And often the first step is a hybrid, meaning that you are often used to have things on premises and you are going to the first steps into the cloud and you start doing something there. But once you get there, once you have that spearheaded team, that perhaps you have your first DevOps team, or perhaps you have your first cloud workload, what happens? Are we there yet? Are we cloud native? Are we DevOps? What does actually that mean? Because the thing is that cloud native has a lot of different meanings to different people. And that's a bit of the challenge part, because people have different expectations to what these words mean. If you ask a business stakeholder, he will think something, and if you ask a software developer, he will think something completely different. Also, if you ask across different teams, because often you are looking from your perspective of your own team, and you are forgetting about the whole organization as a whole. And that is particularly telling to me, because at Fortum, people often don't realize actually what is the complexity in terms of digital development. But we have internal solutions, meaning we have internal, what I call internal products or services, meaning that are in a way anchored to one of our existing business units. So it's part of our core business, so to say, such as generation or optimization or recycling and waste. So those are kind of anchored to the core businesses. But we also have a healthy portfolio of startups, of ventures that are also part of our ecosystem and that we also work together. So in the same organization, you have both internal, let's say, internal applications, internal solutions, but you also have completely independent companies that we are also supporting and governing as a whole. So that's kind of like the level, the understanding of what is cloud native and DevOps. It is very challenging, and it has multiple layers. But starting with your project, if you are new to cloud and you just started to use cloud, maybe coming from on-premises, maybe you are using in the cloud virtual machines. The first step that people often take when going first to the cloud coming from an on-premises is trying to replicate exactly what they are familiar with. It is, I have virtual machines here, or even bare metal servers, and I want to have exactly the same thing to the cloud. This is traditional, the lift and shift approach. We might, you might start exploring with a few managed services while you are there. You might start with, for instance, elastic load balancers, an example. But often you are anchored to the same thing. And then once you are there, some people will classify that you are running fully your workload in the cloud. Are you cloud native? Perhaps not, because you're not really getting much benefits. I mean, in essence, you are not really leveraging managed services. And then often that translates to a second wave of migration to either a container-based type of solution or a serverless event-driven type of solution. And this usually falls into two camps. I don't see it as a two camps personally. We have teams, at Fortum that have a serverless event-driven architecture. We have teams that are using containers, and we have teams that are using containers with Kubernetes, for that matter. So I think the challenge here is that not looking at multiple camps. Actually, technology matters very little for the definition of cloud native, although there is not an official definition, so to say. But from my view, it's all about the mindset that the team has. I can say that we are actually we are cloud native in our digital development at Fortum. We don't really have solutions running on premise. Our new solutions, or all of our solutions, are running in the cloud in either one or in either one of two providers. And from that perspective, all of our mindset is leveraging those managed services that are there with one or the other. The challenge comes that if you need to look also outside the scope of a part or a few solutions, you need to look at the scope of the entire organization. So from a perspective of an organization, it's very tempting that you stick to a single provider. And once you started maybe spearheading with that first cloud provider, coming maybe from an on-premise, there will be someone in your organization that says like, but I want to try that other cloud provider because I'm familiar with that, or because or organically that starts happening in the company, that some other team decided to go with cloud provider B to do their own thing. And that goes part of especially in big enterprises, that is kind of like is our bread and butter. That happens so much. And it's very challenging because often we miss that organizational perspective view, that 30,000 feet above ground view. There are valid reasons to have a cloud strategy that has multiple cloud providers. We have that strategy. I actually will even challenge that everyone should think, even if you are, right now you're using one cloud provider, as a strategy, as a thought, you need to look at multi-cloud from the perspective of a governance, not the perspective of having to run all your workloads across multiple clouds. Because the challenge is that your startup or your enterprise is only one merger and acquisition away of becoming a multi-cloud company. Because your company might be acquired by a company that uses a different cloud. And if you don't have a strong governance, if you don't have a governance that allows you to think about processes rather than specific technologies, you will be in trouble. Likewise, if you are acquiring a company that has a completely different technology landscape than the one that you have, and if you don't know how to incorporate that, then you are in trouble. One challenge is that a lot of companies jump to this question as, well, we will migrate. Well, but you might migrate and then you might spend 1 or 2 years doing something that doesn't provide any value. So you need to look at cloud strategy from a kind of 360 degree. You need to look at all different aspects. You need to look at from a perspective of capacity commitments and the existing business relations. You need to look at a perspective of best of breed services, meaning that when you are selecting, when you are looking at the project for the first time, you might take certain capabilities or requirements of the project and match that with a particular cloud vendor that you are using. So you need to look at from different angles. It doesn't mean that you need to, in your organization, to look at all the cloud providers in the market and use them. It's not what I'm saying. But my point is that in terms of governance and the way of working, your processes need to allow not being focused, not to be anchored in so many specific technologies, because technologies will come and go. And all that matters is kind of the mindset. When you look from a perspective of a company, being cloud native or adopting a DevOps model, it is, especially in enterprise environment, is a lot like moving a mountain. Becoming cloud native and becoming data driven, a lot of people think it's about the technology. It's not about the technology. It's not about your software engineering teams. Your software engineering teams, they are delivering, they are executing a project, but there's a lot of other layers that need to be involved in it. And it all starts from the top, from your company leadership. For you to want your organization to move to be cloud native, the mindset needs to be there from the top, from your CXOs, from your VPs, from your board members, and they need to be educated to it. It's a lot about the culture that you are implying in the organization rather than a specific technology. But that is fairly easy to understand. People often understand that, the company leadership needs to understand that cloud is important, that DevOps is important. And also it's fairly easy to understand for a software engineering team, but we often miss the middle part. And the middle part is actually the most challenging part because it is something that people often don't think about it. And the bigger the company, the more needed it is this type of governance. What I mean with this is that when teams are focusing on delivering and executing projects, there's a lot of things that fall between the cracks that perhaps don't belong to them in terms of ownership. It's things that are systematically that you see across different projects, things that certain things that are not specifically about the technology or the business problem that they're trying to solve, but is about the way of working. And for the governance, what I always recommend and what we did at Fortune is to establish a center of excellence, meaning that there are many ways to, this is not a new thing, it's something that a lot of companies do. Some companies focus in doing a cloud center of excellence, others do a DevOps center of excellence. We look at from a software engineering perspective as a whole, so it's not specifically about cloud or DevOps, it's the whole software engineering competences, development. And we look at from a perspective of forming a virtual work group that can actually avoid duplicating efforts. We all know that once we start developing software, throughout the software development lifecycle, there's a lot of things that are important. If you think about security, cybersecurity is important. Legal aspects are important. The whole enterprise architecture is important. The way that we do site reliability engineering is important. Design is important. So there's multiple competences that are needed to actually govern software. And the challenge is that quite often in big enterprises, these groups sit across different silos. What the Center of Excellence does is essentially bring people to sit in the same virtual table. And by bringing people, it doesn't mean that is a selected, chosen group. Quite the opposite. You should do it openly. Invite whoever wants to join. Open governance and having the strong foundation is super important to actually drive software development, to drive this to a good port. Because there's a lot of things that people don't often realize. Of course, I think I will say that in these groups, DevOps and cloud and quality are perhaps the groups that drive a lot of these things because they see the challenges across different projects, perhaps in a bit of a different way, in a very important way. With that note, it is important that you look at, we often talk with DevOps about development, and we forgot the ops part. Ops part is actually one of the most challenging and one of the most needed things today. Think from scalability, reliability. So we need to treat the whole operations as a value center, not as a cost center. A lot of people talk about DevOps, but they are doing Dev plus Ops. They're not doing DevOps. So bringing DevOps means that the engineering teams need to be empowered and to have that end-to-end ownership, while there are just a few things in place that can help them support them across different projects.
Hi, we are Eficode, and we organize the DEVOPS Conference. Delivering the benefits of DevOps through cloud gives the scalability, availability, and cost-effectiveness we all want. We would love to speak to you to learn how we could help you to do DevOps better in the cloud. You can find us at eficode.com. The links are in the description. And have a great time with the DevOps Conference talks.
In essence, the most important thing is that we stop thinking just about tools or technologies. We all love tools and technologies, but it's all about the process, your ways of working, how you actually make technology decisions, what kind of processes you have in place to support the teams, and above all, culture. It's all about what kind of culture you foster in the company. If you have a culture that has transparency and openness, you start to see things moving in a bit different direction, in a much faster direction. Until you drive your culture to be like that, it's incredibly challenging. No amount of tools or technologies will solve that. It's all about having this feedback loop. Same with processes. Processes, people think about guidelines that live in PowerPoints or Word documents that nobody reads them. We change all of that in the sense that our processes, they have a feedback loop directly with the teams. If the teams don't know about it, they don't exist. It's as simple as that. So we need to have that constant feedback loop, because it's not about just adding a tool a software tool that will magically fix things. Often actually breaks things more, because this is not my quote, but it is something that I take it to heart. That often when we just add digital or add something that is fancy on top of a broken culture or broken process, while you have a broken digital thing, it's essentially that. So there's no point of buying tools that nobody uses, or tools that look good in the picture, but they just become part of the tool chain in the shelf that nobody uses it. So it is important to have the right tool. Yes, tools help, tools are good, but if you don't fix what's the underlying part, the things don't really prosper. And going beyond these technologies is super important. And I wanted to give you a few examples of what we do with this virtual Center of Excellence group, because it is quite important. Of course, these are examples taken directly from what we are doing, based on our immediate needs, focusing short to long term. There's a lot more than this, but I selected a few of them. So to give you a bit of an idea, what does it mean to go, just above technologies? For instance, as I mentioned, from our ecosystem of different digital solutions, our ecosystem is quite big. We have a lot of technologies. So one of the first things that we did was to create a technology radar, to focus on, or making it visible, what are the technologies and tools and processes that we have and that we want to encourage more. What are the safe bets? What are the golden bets? Meaning that what are the technologies that other teams are working on, so that it makes it easier for when someone is selecting a new technology stack, to understand that are people in the company that can support them with those technologies. It's as simple as that. Similar with open source guidelines. We created this open source software guideline about the licenses, a different type of license, and made them into a tool that makes it easier for people to understand their compliance levels in the project. That's another example of something that is often not in the scope of a single project, that you need to do holistically to all the projects. Also, our technology publications and thought leadership activities, such as me speaking in this event, as an example of that. But more than that, we also launch our technology publication in Medium, that I will invite you all to subscribe and check, where we are encouraging also people to publish their learnings, what they are doing there with their technologies, their thoughts about specific technologies and ways of working. Moreover, how do we actually understand, when a project is, just because it's in the cloud, and just because they are working in a DevOps model, doesn't mean that the work is done. There's a lot of things that we need to guide, and the work is never done. Essentially, there's always something. One of the things that we do is to help the teams. We try to make them see their project throughout a few lenses. One of the things is try to measure. We use the DORA metrics that Giovanni was talking about to understand, what is the project, deployment frequency, change lead time, change of failure rate, and mean time to recovery. Those are the 4 metrics from DORA. But also we go a bit above that, and we combine that with things from the site reliability engineering, such as helping the projects to understand what are their SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, and also their recovery point objective and recovery time objective. Try to map those make them comprehensive, so that makes them easier for the team also to discuss with the business stakeholders in what is actually the maturity of the project. Just because they are in the cloud, it doesn't mean that the work is done. One of the most important tools, and I will say that this is my Swiss Army knife of tools that we do with teams, is the well-architected review. It's not something that we came up with. It's something that is a framework that the cloud providers have. Both Azure, AWS, Google, and others have this type of framework. And we use this to kind of understand a bit more about the project and to help the teams to understand what are the gaps. How do we make this all together? I think before I jump into the well-architected review, I wanted you to check this on the right side, this tech radar. This is actually with a tool called Backstage.io, which is an open source component. And we use it as kind of a home base to not just for the tech radar, but also to publish this DORA metrics, to basically make a hub of knowledge, essentially, that usually it's dispersed across the company. So this as an addendum, like, feel free to check out, because it's quite an interesting way to actually compile all of this information. But in essence, it goes about tools, and tools is the least important of it. Just as a note, tools do have a purpose as well, and we should use them, of course. But the well-architected review, as I mentioned, is one of our Swiss Army knives. And why I like it so much is because it allows facilitators, usually from other teams or from this virtual work group, to sit with an engineering team and basically look at their project together under these 6 lenses: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability. If you think about it, what this actually means is it's almost like a 360 view of the project. It's a series of workshops. We usually do one pillar of this, one of these pillars per workshop, so essentially 6 workshops. And we do it with the project in a very structured way, because this has certain questions that allows us to identify and mitigate risks. So what it means is that by the end of this exercise, we have a very fairly good understanding of what the project looks like, not just in terms of technology landscape, but also in terms of what ways of working do they have in the team, what are their challenges, what are the things perhaps that we can, in a way, do better to support them. And likewise, it allows the team to also get that type of view and help to maybe to structure what could their roadmap be to improve those items. For instance, if security is the most important thing to the team, they will know exactly what are the challenges that they are facing in the security pillar. So they can also prioritize based on those findings. And of course, this is something that you can repeat. So you don't, it's not a one-time off. You can do this every year with the team. So you can also see their progress evolving. Last but not least, as I mentioned, we're always learning. Things are, we all know that we're no longer in a digital transformation path. We are in digital acceleration path. And when you are accelerating, there's a lot of things that go out of your control. Actually, both DevOps and cloud are essentially famous for you having to lose control on how you govern your landscape, because you are empowering the teams, right? So there's, of course, things that are need to improve. There's always things to improve, but the way we do it, that's the important bit. We have this, we're always learning. I think that's paramount to if you are working in software engineering, you know that you need to be always learning, because there's always new things around. But the way that you think about learning, in our particular case, we like to map this to the 70-20-10 framework, which means that only 10% of your learning should actually come from typical trainings, at both external or internals, this type of like conferences or webinars or workshops that are delivered to you. A lot of it, 20%, should come through others. And this is actually one of the parts that we impact the most, meaning that we try to bridge this gap of what you learn on the job versus what you learn on the trainings with how we complement that learning between each other and how we exchange that knowledge. We have things like, the lean coffee sessions, where we have this 5 minutes discussion topics every week, with very fast iterations, so that allows people to get to know each other and to openly discuss. Also, of course, the typical type of internal tech talks or internal talks with open houses, but also one-to-one peer mentoring, meaning that people across different projects connect and to discuss about their career growth or to discuss about certain technology. That is actually what makes things evolve a lot faster and creates that culture that I've been mentioning. We don't have all the answers. I think that's also the key thing. There's always just because you get to cloud or because you are working a DevOps model, you need to always think about things outside of the realm of your project, because your project is only part of the equation. You need to look at the entire organization. And I think that is important and something that often we overlook. I hope this made sense to all of you. And happy to answer any questions, or if you want to provide any feedback, happy to hear. Thanks.
So I think the first question that arrived was, what are the cloud platforms that you're using on Fortum? And I almost swear I spotted some AWS logos there. So
there was. So in terms of digital development, we are using both Microsoft Azure and AWS. And there are parts of like our internal core IT that are using other providers. But I will say for digital development, which is perhaps the biggest part or more challenging part cloud-wise, it's AWS and Azure.
Okay, and then in relation to that, there was my personal favorite question. What do you propose to do for decoupling from specific technologies and platforms?
Well, it is always challenging because it goes into the realm of lock-ins. And people often like to talk about cloud strategy in the form of vendor lock-ins or lock-ins in general. The challenge is that, no matter what technology you pick, you're always locked in. That's the first thing that you need to realize. If you pick, Python over Java, you are locking in yourself in a specific technology. If you pick AWS versus Azure as well, I think it's less about, you need to think a bit less about the lock-in versus on what is the value that you are adding to the organization. So I think managed services and leveraging those, they are quite great. We don't want to be focusing on managing data centers. And I think it's the similar to that. I think the challenge is that you need to understand what is your exit strategy. So when you are architecting a solution, you need to have in your mind, if I select this versus that, there's this implications, which means that if I need to move away for X amount of reasons, it will take me this amount of months versus that amount of months, roughly, right? But by using that type of technology, I can also be this faster compared with the other technology. So I think it's about understanding the trade-offs. There's no magic bullet. I think you can, of course, try to architect to be vendor neutral or cloud neutral, but there is no magic bullet. You are making a trade-off. You are trading complexity you are trading the simplicity of the operational benefit of using cloud managed services versus the complexity of having to operate certain aspects of your infrastructure.
So you would, strategically speaking, you would be an advocate of leveraging the managed services as a primary driver, and then kind of the fear of getting locked in secondary in relation to that. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, correct. Because I think that you always get locked in one thing or the other. So it's about understanding the implications of the decisions there.
Yeah, that makes sense. But finally, big thank you, Bruno, and thanks to all the participants in the cloud and surplus track, and see you on main stage very soon.
That's great. Thank you so much to you both as hosts for the track and to everyone that is watching us.